recording going. So the discretion issue, as we talked about last time, can be both useful and detrimental depending on how it's employed. But state agencies, bureaucracies rely on this, right? Because humans quite often that are in the midst of a decision-making situation can probably make a better informed decision if they're on the scene than was originally designed in the boardrooms and offices of the agency. So we give bureaucrats the ability to make decisions and exercise discretion, and that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? And if it's done well, it makes the agencies more effective and more efficient, and it serves people better. If it's a bad decision, it causes all kinds of problems, right? And that's that's where the implementation, is happening. And if it's a bad decision, we can have failure of the implementation. So that's where we left off last Thursday. So today we're going to start talking about the last element of implementation failure, and then we'll talk about the topic of the expansion of government through the expansion of bureaucracy. So fragmentation is an interesting problem, but anytime you have a complex problem, you probably have a fairly complex organizational design to work that problem, right? You're probably going to have multiple people having to come together, work on the same issue, go in the same direction. They need their efforts and their understandings to merge and for it to all make sense. And this is most of what we ask of government agencies is them to handle complex and difficult problems, because if they weren't complex and difficult, somebody would have handled them outside of government a lot of times. And so the ability to coordinate people, the ability to coordinate policy, and the ability to then ensure that process that you've built the coordination around actually happens the way that you designed it. Those are the challenges, right? You want to make sure, right, that everything you've talked about, everything you've designed, all of your decision makers in the process, from the top to the bottom, that it's all working. And that's hard sometimes, right? It doesn't always work out that way. And you can have failure simply because you have too many moving parts. You may not have a choice about the moving parts that you have, right? The number of people engaged, the number of different steps to the process. You may not have any choice on how many of those are and how that's working, right? But you still have to. I'm sorry, are you not hearing? Someone's not hearing me? Okay, so Lauren can't hear me, but Isaac can. I'm showing that my mic is working, so Elijah doesn't hear me. Okay, now you can. Elijah, are you good? Obviously, he can't hear me. It might be hard for him. I can type too. Okay. I would suggest, if you can't hear me, disconnect and reconnect. Oh, so he's already done that, and okay, here, let me do it. And now I'm unmuted. Did that make a difference, Elijah? If he hears me, he can answer, and then I'll know, right? Can somebody else say hi to Elijah through your mic and see if he hears you?
Can anyone hear me?
Was it you, Riley?
No, it wasn't, but
Oh,
That was me, Andrew.
Okay.
Elijah, can you hear Andrew?
all right. Well, we're gonna have to move on.
My advice would be to check and see if your mute button is on. That happens to me quite often.
All right. So we're going to move on. Yeah. Okay. It's a crappy time for that to happen. So fragmentation, right? The complexity of an issue, the complexity of organization can obviously contribute to problems. The example I like to bring out here is the telephone game. If any of y'all have ever remember playing, good. Any of y'all ever remember playing the telephone game where you sit down in a line of chairs and somebody whispers something to a person on one end and they whisper it to the person next to them, and then you go to the other end and see what their message is at the end of all of this? And a lot of times that message is not what it was when it started, right? And that's fragmentation, right? The handoff, right, that goes from this person to this person, this office to this office, right? That transition, right, from disconnected or separated folks causes the problem, right? Everybody can have in their mind trying to do the right thing and trying to follow the rules the right way and trying to implement the policy the right way. But because we're all different people and we all have different perspectives, and we maybe even have different ideas about what the goal is, we run a risk, right, of every time we do a handoff that the person that's taking it from us changes it a little bit, or that maybe we changed it a little bit. And so a lot of what's going on in an agency that looks repetitive and problematic is that the agency is, the bureaucracy is trying to manage itself, right? To make sure that in these complex processes, everything is done right, right? That the checklists are followed, the procedures are followed, that all of the different steps are done the right way. And that's ensuring that there's compliance in the implementation of policy. And you know, it's kind of the same problem of the discretion issue, right? Except that here, instead of having a street level bureaucrat that's just making a decision based on what they say, you've got all of these folks that, whether they're intending to exercise discretion or not, may mess things up. Right? And if you've ever had the feeling or have said these words, you've experienced fragmentation. If you've ever been doing something and somebody else is supposed to be helping you and you say or think, you know what, just let me do it because I know I can get it done right. Or if you've ever had that feeling of if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. That's a result of the recognition of fragmentation and responsibility, right? Somebody else in my household, it's how we load the dishwasher, right? Samantha's fragmented, right? I load the dishwasher and it's perfect, right? My wife comes and puts something else in the dishwasher and looks how it's loaded, and guess what? That dishwasher has not been loaded perfectly. That's fragmentation. We got a different idea about what a dishwasher loaded correctly looks like. You know, and we've been married a long time, and that still has never resolved itself, right? And what we've done is we've just given up on the compliance. Right? We've decided, you know what? They're loading the dishwasher. Stick what you want in there and move on, right? And if you don't like it, then fix it yourself, but don't cause any issues, right? So we just gave up on compliance. And so, you figure out a way around it. And agencies, organizations, they all have the same problem, right? And it's not malicious. It's not people trying to mess things up. It's just what happens when you bring a lot of people into the process. And sometimes, right, it's not just an inefficiency. It's not just an irritation. It causes failure, right? And and agencies fail because they couldn't get things organized, and they couldn't keep their staff all pedaling the same direction, right? And that's the nature of any human organization. We have to recognize it, and it's the constant challenge of an organization is to keep everybody going the same direction with the same goal and the same processes. And it takes up resources. It's hard to do that and do that well, especially over time. And so every agency is going to fail in this area somewhere, sometime, someplace, right? And it's just a matter of recognizing that's the case of organizations, right? That's what happens. Does this make sense? All right, so let's move on. The rest of this class today will be talking, or the rest of this chapter is talking about the idea of big government, and we talk about it here because the largest part of government is the bureaucracy. So when we talk about government's too large, government's gotten bigger than its britches, we need to shrink government. We're not hardly ever talking about shrinking, right, the legislature, the governor, or the judicial parts of it. We're talking about shrinking the bureaucracy, the part that, right, of the government that's doing all the work and where most of the people are. And so first we're going to kind of look at this kind of historical development of how bureaucracies at the state level and at the federal level grew. And they grew for a lot of reasons, right? But most of the time, you can always trace the growth of government through the bureaucracy to the fact that government is trying to solve problems, that the people are needing a solution. There's something going wrong. There's things that need organization. There's things that need solutions. And generally speaking, the people are looking to some level of government to provide that solution. Right? It's seldom the case that the bureaucracy grows, right, on its own volition. Right? It's almost always a response to a problem that the legislators at the federal level or the state level have recognized that the government needs to do something. They've passed legislation, and they have, through that legislation, expanded the bureaucracy. So let's look at some of the things historically that have led to government expansion. First off, just the way the world has evolved, right, has become, right, has shifted from agricultural perspectives and people working in smaller and disparate groups to an industrial outlook and now a technological perspective. Our jobs, our businesses, our organizations have all become a lot more complex. And now we have, right, if you look back in the 1800s, most everything was either agricultural or small industrial development at a city or town level. And as the Industrial Revolution took off and as companies grew, as that need for workers brought people out of agricultural rural areas into urban areas, we had the growth of mega cities start in the mid 1800s and coming forward. Some a little earlier than that, even early 1800s. And now we have cities with, millions of people in them, right? And we have multinational corporations. We have areas that have been of the United States that have been urbanized, right? That are hundreds of miles long. In Texas, right? The I-35 corridor, right? There are still some spaces here and there on the I-35 corridor where there's rural area. But if you look between, Austin and San Antonio, right? I remember when there used to be places with not much there, right? That's not the case anymore, right? That's a 110-mile stretch there, 120-mile stretch, where it's really kind of become one urban area, right? Now we have different governments and all of that, and we have all of these different businesses, but you look at it as a transportation issue. It's one transportation issue, right? You look at I-35 and that corridor, right, of transportation is one transportation issue. Lots and lots of separate places of problems, but it's very complex, right? How are we moving, right, our commerce through Texas? Well, if it's moving north-south, it's moving on either I-45 or I-35 for the most part, right? And so, and it's, right, if you travel either of those two interstates, there's more traffic there than there's interstate for. Enough so that, right, a few years ago, the legislature and the governor's office, when Perry was in office, were looking at building a new north-south corridor west of Austin, right? So we have a third, right, way of getting stuff, from Mexico through South Texas and out of Texas north and going all the way to Canada, right? So the way we've urbanized, right, and the way our industries have changed, right, is causing a lot of issues and concerns and problems that are very complex, and quite often the government is seen as the place to solve that issue. Another part of that leads to government being a solution for so many problems is that we've had what we refer to as the pseudo laissez-faire philosophy in Texas and in the United States as a matter as well. And what that is a kind of hands-off approach to the development of our economy, the development of our industry in our urban areas and our cities, where, initially there's no organization, there's no planning, there's a lot of freedom. And that's good because it lets companies and businesses and people, right, move forward and develop. What it means, though, is that by the time we recognize there's a problem, right, we're well down the road of already having kind of cast the die about this is how we're going to do things. So now here's what the issues we gotta solve. And hindsight tells us that if there had been something in there that organized things a little sooner, whether it was government or some other policy or perspective coming from the people, it would have solved this problem maybe easier and quicker. But generally speaking, our approach to these things is we watch how things happen. The government tends to stay out until there's some problems that are so big they have to be brought in, which puts them on the back end of solving the problem. Now, if you put them on the front end of solving every problem, they might be even bigger and might have even more issues. So it's not necessarily a solution to say that get rid of laissez-faire and start regulating sooner and that'll fix it. That's not necessarily the case, but it is a recognition of how we get where we are with our problems. And at that point, when we see, right, the public start saying, hey, this isn't working, right, or it's working, but it's causing big problems, and we need some solution to it. And when you're looking at bigger issues like the economy as a whole, right, and the economy starts teetering and about to fall off into the abyss, or it does, and we have something like the Great Depression, the problem is huge, right? And the effects are massive and are devastating in a lot of cases, right? And so at that point, it becomes, I think, a natural reflex to look to local governments or state governments or even the federal government as an organized entity that might come in and through regulation and law put a resolution on this problem. Now that means use of political power. That means reducing individuals' ability to make decisions for themselves, right? Enforcing regulations and policies that maybe people don't want. But right, the situation kind of lends itself to it on its own, historically speaking. And we know, historically speaking, that especially if it's an economic crisis, we're going to look to the government to try to fix it. And part of the reason is that we think that government policy is probably the most direct route to righting an economic problem, right? If you have a large sector of the economy crash, you have and it needs support or you need to deal with its issues. You have policy, maybe public policy that caused the economic problem. You have to change that public policy. You have to try to steer a nation's economy or a state's economy from a top level to solve a big problem that's not going to be addressed at lower levels, right? We look to the government to do that. And so anytime you look to the government as a problem solver, you're also looking at the government and expanding that government to handle that problem a lot of times. The other place that we see large growth in the United States and in Texas was what we call the post-war growth, which happens after World War II in our sense, right? In our experience, right? The periods of the late 40s, the 50s, and early 60s was a period of rapid economic expansion, rapid social interaction, rapid international intervention by the United States as a whole, right? A lot of the post-war technology got rolled over into domestic and international economies, right? So you saw this intense period of rapid growth, and we tended to think of the government, especially after the success of World War II, as a pretty good problem solver, right? And there were a lot of domestic social successes and technological successes and infrastructure successes spearheaded by the federal government in the United States in the late 40s, 50s, and early 60s, where the government was right solving problems, making things happen, making life better, arguably for most people in the United States. And so there was in that period, right, a pretty strong perspective that the federal government especially, but local governments too, state governments, were useful tools, right? And at the same time that we saw the government being successful in addressing a lot of these big infrastructure issues, participation was opening up, right, in government. We were expanding democracy in that sense and bringing more people in. And so we had the idea that we could participate in this problem solving. And it was correct, right? We did get a lot more people in, and it was useful to have more perspectives in the governmental processes, and we were expanding people's ability to participate. And that's a good thing. But it's also, right, ramping up the complexity of the whole situation. And some of the problems then, right, kind of become a feedback loop in that, right, we get more complex, we look to higher levels of government to solve the problem. The solution is complex to the complex problem. Complexity keeps developing. It asks for more complex solutions, right? it kind of feeds on itself, and so that's one of the things that we see in the late 70s, early 80s, right? Start to see a split where we start to see some of these things move back away from big government, from federal perspective or state perspective. But as we dealt with these problems, government grew. As the public got more involved, they asked for more solutions. And so we see, if you look at all of the states, right, the state governments, you look at the federal government, you see this growth and you see this expansion of government. Texas, frankly, as a large part because of our constitutional balanced budget amendment, we were slower at this, right? One, our legislature doesn't meet very often to pass new legislation. Two, what we could do was limited by the amount of budget that we had on hand. Three, there's a natural reticence in the Texan for complex government, complex solutions, statewide perspective. So all those things together means that Texas was generally developing or lagging, if you want to say it that way, behind other state governments in the United States. What that means is that we didn't have as many state solutions. We didn't have as many federal solutions in Texas as a lot of other places did. But we still grew, right? It wasn't that we didn't grow. We just grew slower, right? And so we have a bigger state government than we would have otherwise had, probably. This is a figure that's just kind of showing how big Texas state government is, just so you can get a feel on how we've developed and where we're at. And it's comparing it to the 15 largest states. Their average, or you take exclude Texas, take the 15 biggest states, not including Texas, average their state government employees, and then compare them to Texas state government employees, right? The numbers. And so it's broken out into 6 different functional areas, and you can look at number of employees at the state level per 10,000 of population. And you can see, right, that even as a state that lags behind, right, in most places we've caught up with, right, the top 15 states. Now, right, that means that we're probably, right, obviously since this is an average of 15, we're probably, if you were to look at us comparatively state to state, we're comparing to states, 7th, 8th, or 9th in that 15, right? So, but, if you look at it, right, we don't provide quite as much state employment in the public education area. Highways were closed, or the catch-all bucket there of all others, we don't do quite as much. Look at the one functional area where we have more employees than the average for the 15 states. That tells you a lot about Texas right there. Corrections, right? We have 5 more employees over the 15 state average in the corrections area. So that's a lot of work, a lot of people working there, right? That's a large part of our state government at work there. Most other states are putting their emphasis on education. Texas to a little lesser degree, but we put our emphasis on corrections, right? You can definitely see that, which means, right, this is looking at where we are as far as the size of our state government. So continuing on, right, we moved through the 70s into the 80s, the 90s, up through today, right, and we're seeing the same kind of issue of there being complex problems needing complex solutions. But what we see is a change in philosophy starting in the 80s. Our perspective on federal government and its ability to solve problems starts to shift, and we start in a real sense, and Reagan, right, preached this message. It was a belief of his. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it took hold, right? Reagan was constantly making light of the ability of government to solve problems and to fix things, right? And one of his jokes all the time is he'd say, "Yeah, we're from the government and we're here to help," ha ha ha, right? In the sense that we're going to screw things up if you bring us in. And there's obviously elements where that's true, but when your president is casting the federal bureaucracy that way, a lot of people listen to that message, and so we see a shift in perspective of the government being a problem solver, seen as a problem solver, to being seen as maybe a creator of some of our problems. And then when you have that message that government's not as effective as most as you would want it to be, and you couple that with how much government costs, because government's never cheap. Rising taxes, rising service fees, things like that. What we saw essentially was, an economic revolt, right? People were getting fed up with their taxes, and they still are, right? And the cost of government is a solution. And what a lot of people see is the endless bickering between the political parties. It's not solution oriented. And so Reagan Republicanism starting in the 80s and going forward was one of, we're going to shrink federal government. We're going to reduce the programs. We're going to reduce the funding. And that, to use a Reagan term, trickled down into the states. And the perspective started happening in the states as well, that we started focusing, and not wrongly, right, but we started focusing on what government costs us, and do we want to pay that price? And are we going to get the results that we want out of government as a solution-oriented approach? And are now to the point, right, where in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, we saw the rise of the Tea Party in eastern United States, right? And their explicit goal was, as a taxpayer revolt kind of idea, was to starve federal government of funds, right? If we can't shrink it, we're just going to take its money away, and that's effective when you start doing that, right? You start shrinking the budget, and you do that, right, from their perspectives, and giving tax cuts, right, reducing the taxes. Now, of course, that became politicized, and it wasn't across the board tax cuts for everybody. For a lot of it, was targeted tax cuts here and there, and then that became politicized as to who got them. But the original push behind the Tea Party idea was to shrink federal government by shrinking taxes. If you are in a position where the society is working for you, the economy is working for you, you're doing okay, then shrinking federal government is a good thing for you, because it's going to probably put tax dollars back into your pocket. If you're relying on government as a problem solver, shrinking federal government certainly is seen as a problem for you. And so we start seeing changes at the federal level of what they're going to cover, how they're going to cover it, where the money's coming from, reductions in a lot of the social programs, which were deemed to be the heaviest economic hits on the governmental budget and on the taxpayer. And so we started shrinking a lot of social programs, the funding at the federal level. We didn't get rid of the legislation at the federal level and the mandates at the federal level, that we still work those areas. We just stopped funding a lot of them. And so the result of that was that the issues that federal government had been trying to solve, but now had their budget restricted, were pushed down to the states, and pushed down from the states to the local governments. And so the problems didn't go away. But the funding in a lot of cases did. And I'll give you as an example of how that works, and the fallout from that is that one of the things that happened under the Reagan presidency was a defunding of most of the mental health programs at the federal level, which led to an enormous number of people being discharged from mental health facilities. And these people, they were not well. And they were not capable of functioning well within society and holding a job and working in our complex issue. And we have, right, there's a direct line from those decisions in the 80s of reducing federal funding and support for mental health programs to a sharp increase in homelessness in the United States. And you know, what you see is veterans dealing with PTSD, mental health issues, people with mental health issues, being turned out of these programs, and homelessness skyrockets because there's no solution for that, right, for them. And the states are now trying to solve it, and the cities are now trying to solve it. And if you're paying attention to this last election here in Austin, right, we're dealing with that problem, trying to deal with that problem, and figure out a solution to the homelessness problem, right? And some of it is, right, perspectives on who the homeless are and what they deserve or don't deserve. But a large part of it we can trace back, right, to policy decisions that were changed because of a different focus on the economy and what we're going to pay for. What's Andrew got going over? Insurance has a lot to do with that, at least for drug rehab. Yes, and a lot of the insurance, it's exactly right. A lot of the insurance that is available, or the money that's available to pay for that insurance, comes from federal and state welfare programs, right? That help reimburse insurance to handle a lot of that. And we got rid of some of that, right? And as healthcare costs have risen, insurance has become more expensive. Companies have dumped healthcare issues, right? Reduced their support of it. More people have been asked to pick up a portion of providing for their insurance, or all of it. And we know we've got some problems there. The question still is whose problem is it to solve? And that's what we decide when we vote, right? Is where we're going to put that. In Texas, right, where we've had a historical perspective of not using the state as a problem solver if we don't have to, right? This got dumped right on the state's lap, right, in a sense, and then the state government has to figure out what they're going to do, and so you know, there are policy evolution, there's funding evolution. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. You know, and we're dealing with those issues today, right? We're going to deal with them going into the future, right? They're closer to us now. At least the solutions are, and the problems are. And you know, we just saw this vote happen in Austin, right? Where, what was it, Proposition B, which was to recriminalize, right, camping in public or in certain areas, right? To make a fine is in, you know, part of the law, so that police will actually ticket and fine folks that are sleeping and camping in areas. What's up, Andrew?
Well, I guess Ruben's got generally the same question. I don't necessarily want your opinion as much as I'd like to know more, a guess about what the hell that means. Because I mean, I didn't go vote for either way. I had tried to check out that particular one because it interested me.
Yeah, it's a problem right in front of us, isn't it? I mean, we see it.
I live on Riverside. Like I
yeah, okay.
See it every day.
Yeah,
and it's not like the place I came from to move here to Austin was San Francisco. So the homeless, like, and I moved from California specifically because I hated the way that it was being run, and then it came here and it's like immediately the same problem that I saw in California and San Francisco specifically, and now in LA it's gotten terrible, is homelessness. And it's not as anywhere near extreme as that, but it started just getting dirty.
Yep.
And I didn't want that, I guess, to be anything new. So I guess what I would have voted is whatever it would have been to ban the camping. But I would like there to be something. I know that there's something about like these residential tiny homes being built or something like that. And
yeah. Okay, so
I just had questions about that. And
yeah, I mean, I don't view the class as my platform to tell you my political positions. But that being said, this is something that we're in the midst of, and it's a difficult problem because one, you like to have as much agency for individuals to make their own life decisions as you can, right? And that's a tenet of Texas thought. And the other side of it, though, is that as an urban area, right, we have an expectation that our urban areas are cared for, and that the government plays a part in that, and that it should be livable and safe, and right, that we can use downtown as downtown and not as somebody's front yard, in a sense that, you know, that's camping there. And then of course, when you allow that kind of camping, there's all kinds of sanitation issues and problems that go along with that affects everybody. But if you ban it like we just did, then you're going to push all of those folks out away from the places that are probably helping them, right, into other areas, and it makes it harder. And, you know, up here, I live up in North Austin, and I'm in the area of Lakeline Mall, right, and that's where the city of Austin was looking at buying the hotel to turn it into homeless housing, right, because we've got the same kind of camping going on up here under 183 and under 45 and you know, and so part of you doesn't want to see the problem because it's ugly and you don't want to mess with it. But then there are people there that need help, and a lot of those people are the same types of folks that were disenfranchised and not helped by the decisions at the federal government, and now the state government's having to figure it out. And so I don't know what the answer is, right? I understand both the idea that it's a tough decision to ban on public camping because it puts people that are already in a bad position having to make tough choices about where they go and how they try to manage their life. On the other side, though, it is also adversely affecting other people and how they want their lives and their neighborhoods to look. And so I can't tell you there's a right answer to this, but as obviously the case, the problem has filtered from a federal issue where we were doing policy at the federal level to where the city of Austin is trying to figure out how to handle this problem now, right? And maybe local, smaller government is the place to handle it. That might be the right answer. But as you can tell, there's not an easy answer. And there's not an answer that's going to make everyone happy, right? And so I was not at all surprised to see Prop B pass and us to reinstitute a ban on camping. And I have to say that, part of me is in a sense wants to see the cleanup. I mean, if you're using the hike and bike trail down there at the lake, if you're trying to walk up and down the campus and stuff, there's a lot of problems there because of what we see with the camping that's going on, and it needs to be remedied. Sweeping through and just confiscating everything and keeping everybody out is going to be a pretty harsh solution if that's how they do it. And I don't know how they will address it, but it's been criminalized again. I know a lot of people were talking about, it just means that the police are going to come roughshod through there and kick everybody around and fine everybody. And then when these homeless folks that are poor can't pay the fine, they'll throw them in jail. I'm sure some of that's probably going to happen. I don't know that that's going to be the operational plan put into place. I think in a real sense, you criminalize something so that you can use force to get something done, right? And so it is going to move them, and that's going to be not good for them in the sense of where they want to be. But we just don't have solutions right now for the problem either, right? And this is, the city tried something about decriminalizing it, And this proposition was put on there because obviously, right, 85%, or I think is what the passage of the voting population was, right, disagreed with that solution that the city council tried to do. And so, yeah, Ruben, I think, there is some sweeping under the rug here, right? People don't want to see it right in front of their face. I think that's absolutely true. And moving it doesn't solve the problem of the homelessness. It solves the problem of seeing it, right? And it solves the problem of having to walk through the mess. It maybe puts a little bit of a dampering on the panhandling that's really aggressive. And I'll have to say, Andrew, since you brought it up, the only place I've actually been assaulted was San Francisco by a homeless person.
That's funny. The only place that I've ever been assaulted was here.
Yeah, so I mean, if that
I was
problem,
almost assaulted in San Francisco, but I had a really heavy vodka bottle that stopped it.
yeah, and you don't know what y'all can tell us, but I'm a pretty big guy, so I usually can take care of myself. But most of the time, just me turning around and putting a focus on somebody kind of backs it down. But
yeah,
that didn't happen in San Francisco.
Yeah, they were crazy there. But I was going to say something about in response to Ruben's thing. No one knows the right answer. I mean, I don't know if this is the right answer. I just have an idea, obviously. But one of the problems here is my background in coming to Austin was I came here to go to drug rehab. I came here to get sober. So like I'm very familiar and in touch with that community here. And one of the problems that I see the most with people that I will see one week and the next week they're living on the street type deal is it's they'll get thrown in jail for possession. And my idea would be essentially, why don't we fund, instead of criminalization of drug charges and non-victimless crimes, why don't we fund rehabilitation for that? And instead of because the other thing I was going to say with I said earlier, insurance had a lot to do with it. Out of your pocket, if you're over the age of 26 and you're not on your parents' insurance, or you're never had your parents' insurance, or you don't have any sort of insurance at all, if for a week in a detox center, a nice one, I will say, but it's you don't really want to go to a shitty one. They're terrible. I've been to one, but a nicer one here, it's $100,000 for a week in a detox center if you don't have insurance. My insurance thankfully covered most of it, but it was still $10,000 out of my pocket to go to rehab for a week. So, that's
not an option for most people.
That's not an option for most people.
That's
and
right.
The only other option is honestly sometimes prison. I've known people that went to prison to get sober.
Yep.
Because they couldn't afford to go to rehab anymore, so they just went and committed some crime and they went to prison.
No, that is not an unfamiliar story to me, nor is it an unfamiliar problem, right? The cost of that, and so a good portion of our homelessness, right, that's not mental health, is certainly, right, drug issues, addiction issues, and
those are the same, you think?
And we argue over that.
They're codependent.
Yeah, we argue over that, but the solution is probably the same, but it costs a lot of money, right? And we're going to find it somewhere, right? And in Texas, we put most of that emphasis on the individual for funding that, and that, right, obviously doesn't solve the problem. But then, I don't have an answer, right? I don't know. Even if you made counseling freely available, you still wouldn't get rid of the problem because it's an ongoing problem, right? If you can provide solutions and help and rehabilitation for people, it's going to, if it works for a percentage of them. There's an awful large percentage that relapse, so the problem doesn't go away even there. But you're also always going to have more people coming into it because the world we live in is one that drives a lot of anxiety and issues, and it breaks people
also
down, and it drives them to some people to compensate it with other things. So
I suppose that's definitely correct, but it's also the fact that the drugs that are legal and available to us are the ones that kill us and cause us the most harm.
Being not a drug user.
I get you, but this is my background. This is what I write about.
Yeah, no, I understand. So
and if you don't want to get into it, I can definitely stop.
Well, we are going to stop now so that I make sure I finish these slides so you can take your test.
For sure.
Right, because it's over this. So we do need to get through these last couple slides in the last 20 minutes or 25 minutes that we have here. But this is a great, and I'm phrasing this wrong. This is a great problem because it makes us think around the whole issue and realize how complex problems are, and what we're trying to solve is this is, it's not easy. This is not old math, new math, right? Kind of problems. Oh, we're going to learn something a different way. No, these are big issues. People die because of this. We want to help, but you also want to protect your own family and your own investments. How much do you pay to solve the problem, especially if you're viewing it as someone else's problem and not yours? That's part of the problem, is our perspective. Should it be something that is handled by government? Should it be something that's handled by volunteer organizations and churches? There's so many solutions, proposed solutions. There's so many different avenues to trying to work the problem. There's so many different avenues of how people get into the problem. Talk about a complex situation, right? This one issue here, homelessness, covers so much, right? And there's not just I don't think, right, given our experience, I think it's safe to say there's not the one right answer, right? If there is, as Ruben says, no one knows what it is, right? I think it's probably a coordinated response of several different policies to several different situations that hopefully will, right, coalesce into an approach that knows how to do it. But, is the Austin City Council the right size government to make these decisions? Is the state government? Should we go down to volunteer organizations and let them handle it? I don't know. But I'm going to put a period on that, right? And we're gonna move on. I think, though, that it's a great discussion, and I challenge people to think about it. How Austin feels right through this last vote, and right now, 85% of the folks that voted, I think, is the 83 or 85. Said criminalization is part of the answer to this issue. We'll see. All right, we'll see. So here's an interesting chart for you that drives, I think, kind of the discussion that I've been trying to get you to listen to here. Since the 80s, right? Certainly, but it was on its way down to begin with. Federal government has not been growing. Okay. So what this chart here shows you is the percentage of the workforce, the total civilian, non-farm workforce that was federal employees, okay, over time from the 40s through the mid 2016. And obviously that period with the huge spike there is World War II, right, when we had a lot of civilians in the federal workforce, right, doing manufacturing and stuff for the war effort. And then you see it's a continual decline, right? And we were on that decline for a while, which means we were shrinking the size of federal government. And we, right, have kind of leveled out right around the 2% area. So when you look at right, the total working population of the U.S. minus the farm workforce. And the reason we do that is because farm work is seasonal. And so when you include that seasonal work, it spikes the numbers artificially, in a sense. So we have farm work and we have non-farm work, and we track the employment in both of those. So federal work is almost always non-farm work, so that's the one we look at. And you see these declines, right? This gradual but consistent decline in federal employees. And this would lead you, if you just looked at this, to think that the federal government, right, government in general is doing less, and certainly the federal government's doing less. And what we've done is we've transitioned the work of government away from the federal government. And so the federal government is making policy, the federal government is funding policy, the federal government is overseeing policy. But the work of government has been transitioned to the state and local governments. So what you're looking at here, the red line is state employment in Texas. The blue line is local government, which means county and city governments and utility districts and small independent school districts, the employees that work there. And so what you see, this gray line is the combined line, right, from the 80s going forward. It's growing at the lower levels. So now it's not growing at exactly the same numbers that the federal government numbers have been shrinking, but we are seeing, right, over time a transition of the burden of doing policy work being pushed down inside the states. And Texas has resisted this growth more than most other states. So a lot of other states, if you were to go look at the same chart for them, I should probably develop one of those just for comparison to show people, but you're going to see a higher growth of employment at the state and local levels in a lot of other states. So the work didn't really go away, right? It just got transplanted. So if we're to say anything, it's the ongoing focus at the federal level has been to reduce the work that they do, transition their decisions and the money that comes through taxes, right, is transitioning away from the federal government. They're giving it back to the states to spend on these issues, right? And so we get in Texas, right, billions and billions and billions of dollars from the federal government, right, that, as you know, are targeted to solve problems, to be spent in certain policy areas. And the state government works with the federal government with oversight and collaboration, but the boots on the ground are state boots and local boots, and they're not federal boots anymore, right? But they're still, right, us trying to solve problems, and it's hard, right? And we don't know the answers, and we don't always have the philosophy that's going to lead us to the answers, but that's where we are, right? Okay, so we've got 20 minutes. This is the last slide of the material that's on the test, okay? So any questions about bureaucracy, failure, implementation failure, growth or shrinkage of bureaucracy at the federal and state level, before I move on, right? Because I am going to start the next chapter because we've got like 3 lecture days left or something, two lecture days left or something. And so I do want to talk about it. All right. So I'm going to close this and we're going to jump over and start on local government, which is an easy transition because we just showed you that this is where all the focus is coming. So in Texas, local government is, and this will be on your last test, not the one that starts today, right? Local government in Texas refers to county governments, city governments, and special districts, and we'll talk about all 3 of them. But these are right. We've been talking state government, right, the whole time, and so these right? When we move to local government, we're underneath the states and looking at it at these smaller levels. So county government's where we'll start. The first thing you need to know is that there are 254 counties in Texas, which means there are 254 county governments in Texas, right? Now, if you were to go out there and really survey them and look at each one, you're going to find a little less than that in a sense, because in some of our counties, they're so sparsely populated that we see multiple counties sharing some stuff. But generally speaking, there is a constitutional county government established in each county. That is in the state constitution, right? That each county will have a county government. The authority that county has comes to it from the Constitution and from the state legislature. So county governments are given their marching orders. They're given their policies. They're dictated to by the Constitution. County governments do what they're allowed to do, right? They're given permission from the state government through legislation and through the Constitution to do the things they do. So they're limited in that sense that they're of what their duties are and where they're going. Now, as the state legislature sees fit to expand the powers of county government, they can, right, by passing new legislation. So let's look a little bit at the Constitution, right? The Constitution actually mentions counties. It says that the legislature creates these things, right? They create counties, and the point of the county is, right, for the convenience of the people, right? So in other words, to do things for them. And then there's a whole list of provisions, right? And those provisions mostly set up these counties as extensions or subdivisions of state power and state authority. So the state creates them, and as the state built more counties, right, we got to the total of 254. And we've been there for a while. The only way that's going to change is if we, through some reason, aggregate counties or split counties and get more, right? But right now we're there. That's our number. The focus of county government is, as laid out by the Constitution, is fairly narrow, right? It says that counties or governments are going to be responsible for jails, the construction of jails, the construction of courthouses, construction of bridges, and the laying out and construction and repairing of county roads, right? So initially, at least in the 1876 Constitution, the perspective of the counties was as a focus for infrastructure development in a geographical area of Texas, okay? It's changed a little bit since 1876, but not a lot, right? When you look at what they actually do today, roads, right, infrastructure, public safety, right? So we're talking about law enforcement, county sheriffs, and enforcement of the state and county laws, right? County jails, right? So, and then public health and elections. Public health, right, developed in the counties as a way for the state to distribute federal funds down to the counties to handle public health directives, policies, and emergencies. And so we saw, at least initially, the development of county health centers, county hospitals, right? We saw the delivery of federal health programs through county offices, right? And so you would have a county public health officer that was in charge of and we still have those, right? If you've been paying attention to COVID and who are issuing directives at the county level, that's coming out of those county health offices, right? And the people that we have there that are running those, which are generally the people that get put in those positions to run those county health offices are generally well-trained medical individuals. Most of them are epidemiologists, who are folks who have studied, right, the evolution and the solutions and pathways of community diseases and how you try to control the spread and solutions for community diseases, right? Things that are spread like COVID, right? The flu, emphysema, right? All kinds of things that can be, public issues that can proliferate quickly, and so the counties are keeping track of those things that are going on, and they have trained epidemiologists that are both medically trained and scientifically trained to pay attention and track and try to curb the expansion of those kind of issues. And then elections, right? The Constitution sets out that while the state will set the laws for the elections in Texas, the counties will be the focus of how we administer, elections. And so you're going to see that your county tax assessor, your county tax collector, depending upon what they call them in which county, are going to be responsible for organizing and running all the elections at the county level. So a lot goes on at the county, things that are important to us, right? Road maintenance, bridge maintenance, safety, right? All of these things, right, that we assume are going to happen and be there. The county has a role in that. Now, most municipalities, most cities are doing a lot of the same stuff too. And so what happens is that you see a collaboration between cities within a county and the county governments, right? They work together and they try not to duplicate each other's efforts. And so in a place like Travis County, where you have the city of Austin, right? City of Austin takes up a large chunk of Travis County's area. So the city is doing a lot, and the county's, right, helping and then managing along the edges where the city council, the city government's not doing things. So but these are the places that we see the counties focusing their efforts. Here are the general offices that counties fill right through elections or appointments. So your county has a county government, right? That county government consists of a county judge and 4 county commissioners, right? So those 5 folks provide your executive branch and legislative branch in the county, at the county level. We didn't cover courts in Texas, but the county judge has technically 2 jobs, right? They are the constitutional county judge and preside over the Constitution County Court, which means they can have court cases and send people to jail and fine people. But they're also the administrative officer of the county. So, and then the commissioners are elected as the legislative part of the county, right? The board members. And those 5 folks serve as the board. We also see, right, elected county sheriffs. We see elected county tax collectors and treasurers, and then we see appointed attorneys and clerks at the district level. We'll get to those. So the county commissioners court, your actual government, county government, right? The Constitution defines it as a collaboration of the county judge and 4 elected, the county judge is elected, and the 4 county commissioners also elected. The commissioners are generally elected out of their precincts. So the counties are broken up into 4 precincts. Each precinct has a county commissioner that gets elected out of that precinct by the people that live in that precinct. Those 4 commissioners are the legislative body of the county. The county judge is a member of the legislative body and an executive power officer as well. So they run the day-to-day administration of the county, right? They're the CEO. And when policy is made at the county level, decisions are made, budgetary decisions, things like that, they act as, the judge and the commissioners act as the voting body that puts that through. So if you're having issues in your county with road maintenance or your jails are not up to standards and your county's being fined because of that, or your bridges aren't there, or you're trying to solve some flooding issues that are out in the unincorporated areas of the county, right? All of those kind of issues are going to be brought up to the county commissioner's court. Now you're going to call your county commissioner and say, hey, got a problem here and this needs solving, right? I'll give you an example. And I brought up the flooding one where I used to live in Travis County, and I don't anymore. Lived in an area where we had one road that where we lived was off of, right? And that road connected to the access road on Mopac, and it connected to, what was that, Harvey Road? Basically, it's this area just north of Parmer and east of Mopac on the north side of Austin. And not too far east of McNeil High School. And that single road that connected right between those two roads, when it rained hard, would flood on each end of the road. Right, there was a creek on one end with a low water crossing. It'd be 3 feet underwater. The other side, right, got flooding coming down the hill and across the railroad tracks, and it would flood about a 30-foot section of the road. And so when it was flash flooding, we couldn't go anywhere. Right, you couldn't get out, you couldn't get in. It was too deep. And so as a community, right, we contacted our commissioner and said, hey, y'all need to come out here and do some land work because we're locked in, right? We can't get out, and sometimes that lasts for more than a day. And somebody needs to get over here with the county construction equipment and solve this flooding issue. And they worked on it, and they finally got it resolved. But it wasn't. We didn't live in the city limits of Austin, so it wasn't Austin's job to manage those roads. It was the county's job, and so your county commissioners who you complain to. All right, so and if your commissioner's non-responsive, you can go to your county judge because they preside over the whole county, right? And say, hey, right, aren't you up for election and don't you want to fix my street? They do have the authority constitutionally to still manage the county court, constitutional county court, and sit as the judge in the county court. Most of them don't do that anymore. The legislature has created statutory county courts that do the same thing that the county court judge used to do, but the counties are so big, one county judge couldn't handle the flow of cases anyway, so they created these statutory county courts, and they actually handle most of the actual court work, right, the cases, and not the county judge. And so the county judge is focused most more explicitly on the everyday issues of running the county. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's a good stopping spot. We'll call slide 7 our last one for today. You'll go out there and take your test and do well, and we will pick back up and start talking about the county sheriff on Thursday.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Everybody have a good day. Do well on the test. Right, and thanks for the participation on the homeless issue. I appreciate it. That was good interaction. So I'll see you guys on Thursday.